Right, so today I'm talking to Amy, who wrote a book called Yoga for Depression. Sorry, Amy, I didn't say. I was scared of saying your surname actually. Weintraub?
Weintraub. Yeah.
Weintraub. Sorry. Yeah. You're not just Amy, but she wrote a book for Yoga for Depression, which caught my eye, and she's done a lot of other stuff as well, and a more recent book, The Temple Dancer, which is, I think, come out more recently, I think you've been involved in the territory of yoga for emotional wellness for many years, I believe. And so I suppose I just wanted to start with saying what was your background and how, like your early years and your early experience of depression, I suppose, and then how did you come to yoga from there?
Well, thank you, Adam. I'm delighted to be here with you.
It's lovely to have you.
I was a fiction writer, depressed.
Really?
First, a lot of self-medication,
Right.
and then in psychotherapy and on medication for probably 10 years or so.
Really?
And
medication as well for that long?
Yeah.
Right.
And still, the psychotherapy helped me understand issues of family of origin and helped me manage, but I was not a happy camper. And I really, as a fiction writer too, I believe that, we sort of write from that angst, that we need that discomfort, psychological discomfort from which our stories emerge. And I happened to go to Kripalu Center, which was only about 2.5 hours from where I lived in the United States. And I just fell in love with the practice. And at that time, we didn't have yoga mats. We were practicing on fluffy pink blankets.
I know. Yeah. I remember the towel and slipping all over the place on this towel. Yeah.
Exactly. So
So when was that? Must have been in the 1980s still.
That was in the 1980s, the late 80s. And I came, there were no yoga teachers in my town. I came back, I took those old video cassettes and practiced with those video cassettes every day, and then kept going back to Kripalu. And after about 8 or 9 months of daily practice, that included pranayama, and it included some sound, but mostly more pranayama than mantra at that point. A little bit of yoga nidra, not a lot of meditation at that point. I started feeling better and better. And I was able, with supervision of my psychotherapist, my psychiatrist, to slowly titrate off my medication. And that was in 1989. And I have not been on medication since. Yoga became my medicine. And I went to Kripalu for my first yoga teacher training, and I guess it was 1990, 91. And I did it for my own deepening of my practice, my own mental health. And when I came out of that month-long immersion, I was just passionate about sharing what had transformed my life, what had saved my life, literally.
Absolutely. I had the same experience.
Others.
Yeah. And how long before it started working for you? I mean, I just remember I was on medication as well, and I think we have to be very careful here. And I've done a few of these, to kind of, over egg the matter, or yoga, or right. I mean, if you're on medication, then you have to be very careful to come off it, because it was hellish for me to actually come off the antidepressants that I was prescribed for a few years. In fact, it was almost worse than the depression itself. The experience of coming off, right, was very difficult. But so I was on medication and I was drinking heavily. And I remember going to the first yoga class, and I just managed not to drink until about 4 or 5 p.m. when it was on, right? I thought, out of respect to the yoga, the idea of yoga, I didn't have any idea what yoga was. I had respect to the teacher of the class, and I ought not to be having a drink and going to the yoga. That didn't feel right. So I thought, I have to drink after. Anyway, so I went on it, and with the very first time, I just thought, bloody hell, this is absolutely... I went home and I just practiced the next day what I'd learnt in the class, And from that day on, I've never missed a day of practice. I mean, it was that was a moment there in the class. After the class was finished, I just felt completely different to what I had done in years. Right?
Yes. Well, and I think you make such an important point, Adam, that if we are on medication, that we need supervision and a slow titration.
Yeah.
Never just throw your meds in the toilet, especially if you're on an SSRI, which it's very challenging, as you've
really
discovered. To come off the medication. And the other aspect of it is that some of us will be able to titrate slowly off the medication with supervision, and some of us may not. And if that's you, bless it. Bless that medication, because it's what's bringing you to the yoga mat, and it's a blessing. So, I'm not in favor of like everybody gets off medication and yoga is the panacea.
Yeah, the general panacea.
It's a support. And it took me, and my actual story was that the psychiatrist I'd seen for years felt like she had finally stabilized me on the medication, and she did not want me to come off that medication. So, So
what was it? Was it the SSRIs or what?
No, it was actually, I had a unipolar depression. So what worked for me was lithium.
Oh my God, you're lithium.
So that
and you got off lithium.
I got off. I mean, that's the kind of medication that you're told you'll be on for the rest of your life.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I went to a friend's psychiatrist, and he saw me for maybe a couple of months, and he said, I really don't see you as a candidate for this medication. And very slowly he titrated me off that medication. And again, whether I was misdiagnosed or whatever, the yoga has sustained my mental health. And in fact, when I was on medication, I was tamped down. I was numb. So whether it was from the depression or from the medication, there weren't a lot of feelings. And when I was off my medication and practicing yoga daily, I felt my feelings. So I might appropriately cry. And then kind of look down on myself and say, Amy, what a big heart you have. And immediately shifted into like a celebration that I could feel. So it was, so it's not that I don't feel my feelings. I feel more now than I did when I was on medication before yoga. But it moves through. It's like as we develop those, that ability not to necessarily sustain the seer or the witness consciousness, but as we develop that ability to access that deeper state of consciousness, that awareness, that boundaryless state of witness consciousness through our practice, then we're less reactive. We're able to allow whatever the barbs of life that are coming towards us to move through us and not get stuck. So I use my practice every day. I meditate, and in the beginning, probably you may have experienced this too, Adam, with an anxiety disorder. I was not able to meditate. I was able to. I was able to.
That's what I was going to say. Is did you immediately get on the mat? Okay, or I mean, because for me it was an incredible challenge to get on the mat every day. I mean, although I knew I needed it, and I was adamant that this was the thing that was really going to save me, right? Because it wasn't going in a good direction. I was only 19, for God's sakes, I struggled so much to get on that mat every day. I mean, it was like wading through quicksand, To get on it, once I'd done it, it was great. But to get on the mat was a very much a struggle. Yeah.
Well, here's what I would do. First I used an audio tape or a videotape. As I was learning the practices because there were no yoga teachers where I lived. So I couldn't go to a class. I had to go drive up to Kripalu, which I did frequently. Eventually, I learned enough through my trainings, not even trainings, just workshops initially at Kripalu, that I didn't need those tapes anymore. However, there would be times when I would wake up and absolutely, like you, not feel I could get to the mat. Just could not hardly get out of bed, let alone
I think it's
roll
important
out
to
of
acknowledge for a lot of people that might be listening that, it seems like, oh, great, we're all okay now, right? But if you're, right, but if you're struggling, it is a struggle. And, and I struggled hellishly to get to the place that I am. And I'm pleased I did it. And I would, it was necessary, but it was hard,
Yeah. Well, here's what I would do. And now people can access you and your online classes and so much more online. At that point, after I got the sense of my own practice, if I woke up feeling that way, I would plug in another teacher. I would just zap it in the audio cassette player.
That's what we had at the time. Yeah. Put a DVD in. Yeah.
Right. And I would start, I would let them lead me. And by 5 minutes, I would turn it off because I was then motivated to do my own practice. But that's what we have these tools like online classes with you and with others and, so many tools now available to us. And that's what it's easier to press play or to, get on.
You also have a live being there with you now, right? Like, I do the online class in the morning and it's self-practice style as Ashtanga, I think oftentimes just, the people just want the feeling of being online with other people. It's a connection, it's a sense of support, even if they don't get any instruction or they don't know the people that are on with them, just hearing the names and the familiar names and that familiarity. I think it, increasingly as we've become more and more isolated as societies, I think it's, these connections are fundamental. And I think, it's probably, in the root of any mental health difficulty, let's say, is a lack of sense of, it's a little isolation, right? It's a lonely sense of isolation and, and a lack of connection. I think, we can always kind of trace it back to that as a root feeling, at least. I felt incredibly isolated, even though I was, surrounded by people, seemingly,
Well, we feel constricted. I mean, when we talk about dukkha or discomfort, as opposed to sukha, dukkha is that sense of isolation, that sense of just being separate and alone. And what yoga teaches us, and I studied with an Advaita Vedanta teacher,
did you?
A non-dual teacher. It was Nitya Chaitanya Yati. He left his body in 1999. He was in Uti. He ran the Narayana Gurukula, and I went for 2 years and studied for a couple of months each time with him. And so what yoga, all the traditions of yoga teach us is that within us, we are whole. We are unsullied by whatever may have happened to us. And what our practices do, even if for a moment, is take us to that place of wholeness where, that place of well-being. And it's like a window through whatever mood is visiting or whatever story's going on, or whether whatever outside world obstructions and constrictions we're facing, there is that window. And I think probably in your first yoga class, you experienced that moment. And that moment led you to say, I want more. And that's certainly what happened for me.
From your first class, right? You really.
Yes.
I mean, I think it's just taking. It feels like, and it's slightly kind of cliched way of saying, but kind of taking the power back. Like before, I just felt like anything could happen, and I just couldn't cope with it. Right, like whatever might happen, and anything bad could happen. I just wouldn't be able to cope. Right, so I was constantly terrified that that something terrible would happen, and I wouldn't be able to cope. But
Yeah.
with the yoga, you start to set, and also more than anything, I think what it was is just putting the idea in my head that I was able to have personal volition to kind of change my reality and to do something positive for myself for the better, right? And
So, yeah.
previously,
Yeah,
I kind of felt I was sucked into a kind of vortex where I couldn't cope, and I didn't feel I was coping. So therefore, and I felt powerless, and it kind of dragged you down. And then, then with the yoga, it was just like every day you get onto your mat and you make this kind of resolution to yourself. Right, I'm here, and I'm doing something positive for myself and taking some volition in my life. Right, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and in fact, research shows that when we have a sense of, quote, control of our life, as you said, that volition, that in and of itself is shows an improvement of mood in terms of depression and anxiety. So just taking control, saying, yes, this is something I can do for myself. And then the practices themselves, I mean, the research shows, for example, that our heart rate variability improves. Heart rate variability means the ability to go from the sympathetic to the parasympathetic in a natural way, not get stuck in fight or flight or get stuck in sort of that couch potato lethargy that we sometimes feel. And so the higher the heart rate, the better. And anxiety, depression, history of trauma, PTSD, often it shows low heart rate variability. So yoga changes that. Yoga improves prolactin, oxytocin, those feel-good hormones that are also neurotransmitters, serotonin. All those levels improve with yoga. So we're actually, not only is it like, okay, we're taking control of our lives, we're doing things that actually change our biochemistry.
Physically, changing. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I definitely thought that before. I felt like actually I would swing between those two states of hyperarousal, in terms of, if we say just the polarities of sympathetic and parasympathetic, then, into kind of absolute dormancy and kind of like turgidity, and there seems to no balance between the two, right? But I did find, just simply doing it, I without any real technique or study, just going along to that weekly class and then cribbing whatever I could from that class, and I was probably absolutely awful at what the postures I was doing. It didn't really matter, to be honest, it just kind of worked, there's just the embodiment of self. Before it was very cerebral, I think, and just coming back down to, I felt safe in myself again, rather than a mind out of control in somewhat a body,
And you were doing an Ashtanga practice
from the early days,
early days, and that has a deep Ujjayi breath that's included. And it's interesting because I wrote a chapter in a recent book, Yoga for Mental Health, with Holger Kramer, who's a prolific researcher on yoga. He's German. And his survey of research and then his own research shows that it's the breathing practices, the pranayama that we do in yoga that is the most efficacious for shifting mood. So, a lot of what I've taught, I developed a program called LifeForce Yoga that brings yoga into mental health treatment and health treatment and, various settings outside of a yoga studio. So we've adapted practices to make them more palatable for those people who haven't necessarily signed up for yoga and aren't like yoga, I don't know about you, but in the early days of teaching Kripalu yoga, I would hear, oh, I love the stretching, but I don't like that breathing stuff.
Oh, really?
And that's because people couldn't breathe deeply. So when you ask them to take a deep breath, they were upper chest breathers and
Yes.
they couldn't do it.
Yeah. Or it
And
made
so
them, anxious even, collecting with the breath can actually make you, more anxious, right?
not only that, I learned that the hard way because I was doing yoga therapy one-on-one. And of course, in most yoga trainings, not necessarily Ashtanga, because I haven't done an Ashtanga training. I've done many Ashtanga classes. I love all styles of yoga. But one of the first things you do is to learn to teach people yogic three-part breath, Dirga Pranayama. And it's bottom of the lung, midsection, all the way up to the clavicles. And so I had someone who was extremely anxious come to me. She had just moved from Australia and had no friends. And she had been an Ashtanga practitioner in Australia, but had sort of stopped doing yoga, become a mother, just was not happy. And she didn't want to go into psychotherapy. She had read my book, Yoga for Depression. So she booked a session with me. And her... so right away, I could see she was an upper chest breather and she was very revved up. And I suggested that we breathe, got her down onto her back to breathe down into the bottom of the lungs. What happened? Exactly what you're describing. She burst into tears. It activated 2-year-old grief from the fact that her father had died when she was 2 years old, and she became her mother's primary emotional support and never had her own childhood. And it all came spilling out. And it scared her, which is exactly why she hadn't gone into psychotherapy in the first place. She thought she could do it all through her body. So at that point, I stopped using, especially when I noticed someone was an upper chest breather, Ujjayi or Dirga Pranayama initially. Right. And what I started with was something, Anuloma and Viloma Krama, which in LifeForce Yoga we call stair step breath. So as not to intimidate anybody. And we don't even use the language of breath. We use metaphor and imagery. And just saying those words reminds me of Angela Farmer and Victor Van Gogh, who I studied with years ago. And I assume they're still in Greece. I don't know where they are now. But Angela was beautiful. She had studied with Mr. Iyengar. But so anyway... stair step breath. Do you want me to
I'd love you to. Yeah, I was
going
to say I'd need to know what that is. Yeah.
Okay.
And then my next question before I forget it is, how would you start off then with someone? After this, like how talk us through how you would start off with someone who comes to you for depression now. Yeah.
Well, it depends. If they're revved up, and talking a mile a minute, and and they're breathing in their upper chest. I would start off, I would put on, there's a wonderful track from Krishna Das that is Hara Hara. It's a fast track. And I would have them, do a joint warm up and kind of shake it out. And then I would invite them to allow, after they've sort of shaken out that, I'd also invite them to do like pulling prana or power hara, which is meeting that anxious mood. And then then I would do a body scan. So it would be something like, and maybe we should, before we do stair step, I'll give you an example of that. And you'll see it's not just meeting the mood with something more vigorous like Ashtanga yoga, 108 sun salutations, whatever. That's a way of meeting that anxious state.
I mean,
but it's also grounding.
When you say meeting the mood, that's. I mean, would you just explain that? Because I like the term.
Yeah. Well, it's. So if someone, as I've mentioned, is revved up, anxious, we call that rajasic. If they're in that overstimulated state, you don't want to ask them to simply watch the breath or take a deep breath. That's going to make them even more agitated. Exactly. So you want to meet it with a practice that's more vigorous. So
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
could be like an Ashtanga practice, for example, or it could be something really simple, especially if you're in a healthcare setting. You're not going to roll out a mountain and do Ashtanga practice. You're going to do something simple. So
But what if
mental health,
if they were depressed though? Would you say the same, to meet it with a kind of slow
same,
practice? Same.
slow.
Meet it. So
And for
like sheets like.
like starting in a supine position, or if you're in a mental health, setting, then starting in a seated position with something like stair step, and beginning to ramp up the energy. So you start slowly. So if it's a yoga practice, you might start in a supine with many leg positions,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
using grounding tones like lum, as you practice, and vum, and you build the energy from supine to maybe something we call flying cow, and then come up to standing, and then do your standing practice, and then take the arc back down to yoga nidra or shavasana, relaxation at the end. So the arc is some of the same practices, both for anxiety and depression, but the arc is different.
Right.
Whereas with anxiety, you would meet with something vigorous and then slow calm it down.
Fantastic.
So we could meet. Do you want to meet depression first or anxiety first?
Oh, I'll go for depression.
Okay. So we'll do stair step breath.
Okay.
So I often encourage visual imagery, not necessary, but you might bring into your heart's mind, an image that for you represents that's soothing and serene. Maybe a place in nature where you have actually felt yourself soothed and serene, and uh, and and also a sense of completeness and strength. So what we're going to do is we're going to, and if you don't have an image, if it doesn't readily come to your mind, then maybe think the words calm strength, or courage, something that resonates for you. And we're going to do a breath, and we're going to do it through the nostrils, in and out. And we're going to do it as though we're climbing a mountain. And from the top of the mountain, we'll look down and see something beautiful, and then we'll come down the mountain. And we'll do this in several variations. So we'll start, and you can do this lying down. If you were depressed, you might start lying down with a little bit of stretching and then go into this breath. So you can allow your eyes to close or soften or not, and then take little steps as though you're climbing a mountain through the nostrils. And at your own pace, when you get to the top of the mountain, imagine that you're looking out, seeing something beautiful, and then slide down the mountain through the nostrils. Beautiful. And then again, at your own pace, little steps as though you're climbing the mountain. When you get to the top, at your own pace, look out, see something beautiful, or think the words, and little steps down. And notice what's happening in your belly. A light belly pumping, a light kriya. And again, little steps as though you're climbing a mountain. And when you get to the top, look out, see something beautiful, and then little steps down. And one more time like that, little steps up And when you get to the top at your own pace, see something beautiful that makes your heart smile, or a word, and little steps down. And last time, little steps up. And when you get to the top, look out, see something beautiful, or let your word arise to your heart's mind and slide down the mountain. And allow your own natural breath to find you again. That sweet sensation of breath. Just join with that river of breath. And when you're ready, you can allow your eyes to flutter open.
Excellent.
Yeah,
I'm so relaxed. I can't continue now.
But what we did, it's a relaxed kind of alertness, because what we were doing is
the pumping. Yeah, I can see that.
So it's a very mild,
and you can do that in bed as well.
You can do it in bed.
Because I was going to ask. Sorry to interrupt, Amy. I was going to ask if someone's really depressed, and I do have, I've had this said to me that, I really can't get out of bed, and I can't face certainly doing yoga if I get out of bed, I mean, would you start with that in bed?
Yes, in bed, right. In bed, supine. It's called Stair Step Breath. And I actually have a new card deck that Sounds True Macmillan just brought out in 2021 with 52 practices. So that's on my website, amyweintraub.com, and it sounds true. But it's 52 practices that meet the mood. So you choose like a card that's like say you're depressed, a blue card, and you start with a practice that meets that mood, and then you choose a red card to sort of shift the mood.
Right.
So it's
the first is kind of acceptance, which is, I think, important in any, accepting
Absolutely.
one's own state and, embody. And that's what I felt with, with the journey as well. Like there was me in the posture, accepting and having the courage to accept the feeling that was there. Whereas before there was this non-acceptance of mood, playing a role in daily life, feeling otherwise, which is incredibly painful, right? Because
it's
inside you're feeling one way, outside you feel you ought to feel another way. You're playing a role, and it's fragmented, it's disingenuous. And and then the first time in the class, you feel like you could be anything you want. You could accept your depression or your anxiety. You're just allowed to kind of be. And I think that was another revelational thing for me. This possibility, and that's why I latched onto this idea of meeting the mood, because I do think it's an incredibly potent phrase you've come up with there. You've publicised. And I think it's a a fantastic an important piece of information to get out there. That first of all, you meet the mood you're in and accept it, and then only can you start to play around with it, to alter it to how you might like it to be.
Right. When you were 19, if you hadn't found yoga, living that double life where you were one thing in public and another thing at home in the privacy of your own room.
Well, even when I was in public, I was outside some way and inside another way, right?
Yeah. So that, that dis-ease, that disconnect from your true feelings and your heart and from self would have eventually caused so much distress in your body that you probably would have gotten sick. Physically, not only from the alcohol consumption that you were doing at the time, but just tamping. What
tamping
we repress is going to come back and bite us in the what. It just when we tamp things down, we are constricting, and the opposite of and that's that's what dukkha is, that sense of depression, that constriction. And what we want and what yoga does is clear the space so that there's more room for who we are authentically to arise. And so if you want, I can show you something that would be a second practice for depression, let's say. So you've met the mood with and then a second practice would be something to be more alert and energetic, whereas a second practice for anxiety would meet anxiety, and then you would follow it with a more calming.
There's some fantastic ideas going on here. I mean, I love the arc as well, and I like the idea of, I often talk to people about saving the space or just keeping the space. And I mean, I think that's, you said it well. There's the idea of yoga kind of fencing out a space of self and allowing you to kind of invest yourself within those parameters, and it's not doing anything particular, is it? It's just defining that sense of space to abide in. Whereas before, everything is like, like it's like the Gita, like a ship on water in a storm. You feel like I felt like I've got no sense of integrity in terms of boundaries, It was all just so scattered. And there's yoga, it's just like, here's a space to abide in,
Right. I don't think I had boundaries and had a sense of my own ahankara, my own self, until I was in my mid-30s. Because, I had a history of trauma, invasion of my body. And when that happens, you don't have a sense of your own personal self and your own boundaries. And it was through yoga, and, I had done psychotherapy, but it wasn't until I felt that sense of ahankara, my own personal sense of space, my own inner territory, my own authenticity, through yoga, that I really felt that sense of self within. And then I was able to connect with self with a larger S, that sense of spacious awareness, that witness consciousness that I had no access to without a sense of personal self. And it's when at that point that Atman and Brahman are one, that sense of the bigger self united with the personal self. And yoga brought me to that point, and allowed me from the very first class a moment of connection to something much bigger, much deeper that was within me.
But I think you also touched on a really important point, pragmatically speaking, that first of all, without a sense of practical and everyday self, there's no point aiming like in the, in the far out, in the kind of enlightened, up here, right? And I think that I have noticed that people suffering with mental health difficulties, including myself, it's easy to kind of miss that part, right? Because, as much as there was embodiment for me, then you also want to, you're still involved in the same sense of self, and there's a wish to escape it, right? and it's easy to escape into yoga in some sense of absenteeism, right? In terms of, well, it's, it's not about self, it's about, it's not about ego, so let's not go there at all. Let's, but I think you're right. I mean, first of all, you have to use yoga more practically speaking to make a healthy sense of regular ego in daily life, right? Without aiming too high, too quick, I suppose.
I think in India, and, our masters, our teachers, they grew up in a very different world where the village raised the child. Everybody knew who they were. There is still, even though it's illegal since 1961, the caste system. So you knew your place in society, you knew your place in the family. So the job of the Indian guru was to break through that
healthy sense of self already. Yeah.
So my first experiences in India with a big stick teacher who I didn't have enough of a sense of self. So when he's cracking his whip, and my first experience was a deeper sense of disconnect because I didn't have that sense of self. And little by little, through my practice, I developed more of a stronger inner sense of self that then allowed me to embrace those moments of egolessness, those moments of selflessness, of individual selflessness, where we are deeply and intimately connected to self with a capital S. I think we need to be sure we're not prematurely transcending the emotional work.
Escapism, isn't it? It's like,
the emotional work that needs to be done.
That still needs to be done. Yeah, I suppose this segues nicely onto asking you, like, what would you mind saying? I mean, at all, if you don't mind, your own difficulties with the practice, still, right? I mean, you mentioned in the start of your book, Yoga to Oppression, it was like a fog that was lifting, and you could see clearly, and now you could see your car keys, and like everything was just, before you didn't know where you put them, and you didn't even know where your car was, and right? I have the same thing. Your mind is so turgid, so foggy, and then there's this open, it's like, it's like the clouds part a bit, right? But I mean, I'm completely frank and open with you and with everyone that it wasn't all the way like that. It didn't just go up and up. I mean, there were a lot of obstacles and there was a lot of struggle against the sense of depression dragging me back down into that dark place. Did you have that at all? I mean, what were your principal struggles in coming out of this?
Yes, to a certain extent, but the plugging in of someone else's practice, as long as I got on the mat every day.
And you did manage to, whatever.
Yeah, I was able to clear the space. Now, and that's why I recommend using tools. So, don't, have your, have your device near at hand. Not that I think we should have all those, but have your device near at hand. And if you don't feel like getting out of bed, or you're a couch potato, you can't get off the couch when the remote dies to change the channel, get support. Just press a button and get a practice going. Hear someone else's voice to get you to start moving again. Maybe right in bed. And I know, I have lots of downloads on my website and that can do that. And you have a tremendous amount of resources on your website, Adam. So I really feel that get support from so that you have that medicine every day. And that was the answer was just taking my medicine every day, which was a yoga practice. And then eventually a meditation practice.
Right.
When I was able to meet my anxiety-based depression with my practice, with pranayama, with sound, and we use a lot of sound in LifeForce Yoga, mantras that are accessible. So although I love chanting kirtan to Krishna and Radha and, and Rama and Sita, the sounds we use are the basic lam, vam, ram, yam, hum, the basic bija mantras that actually vibrate our energy sensors, our chakras, and are not necessarily tied to deities, so that they're accessible to a yoga naive population. Because
absolutely,
a lot of people I've trained are working in those settings.
Absolutely. But those seed syllables are really, really profound. I mean, and you mentioned before we started the interview on, a practice that you use those syllables and did a particular set of actions. Would you mind going through those?
You can use those sounds in poses,
right.
but there is a particular LifeForce Yoga Chakra clearing meditation that uses them. That may be too long to do right now.
Okay, right.
But I can, for example, if you're in your warrior pose, you say you're in Warrior 2.
Right.
I think that's an Ashtanga yoga.
Yeah, no, it is.
I'm,
It is. You're totally right. Yeah.
I haven't done Ashtanga for a while.
Well, yeah, it doesn't matter. Any posture's great. Just incorporate these sounds because they're fantastic. And my own teacher also incorporates the sounds. Yeah.
So rum, for the solar plexus.
Right.
So when you do rum, 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 it pumps the belly. So here you are, you're in your, let's say, I actually worked with a teenager who was like, like this. Okay, this is, she's very depressed.
Yeah.
And it was like, add rum, rum. And I said, rum. And she eventually, got to that rum, 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 rum. And when we completed, she was like vibrant and alive, and she could actually talk about what was making her angry. And here's one thing that would meet anxiety and would be a second practice for.
Yeah, we didn't get through to that. Yeah, great.
So it's. I'm going to take off my slippers.
It's the beauty of doing online at home.
And here's what we're going to do. We're going to do Breath of Joy, which is from the Kripalu tradition, but we're going to do it in a way that's safer for lower backs. And when I was originally taught this, and the way it's still taught at Kripalu often, is 3-part inhale. Inhale forward, inhale to the side, inhale up, and then ha, and you throw the body forward. But in yoga therapy and the people who are doing yoga now, not necessarily the young Ashtangi yogas, but yogis, but the majority of non
absolutely I mean it takes an incredible amount of ableism to do that Ashtanga.
So it's a 3-part inhalation. Inhale forward, inhale to the side, inhale up, and then ha. So you're in a chair pose, Utkatasana, with your arms back, your knees are bent, and it's more grounding, and it's not throwing the body forward, better for the lower back. So we'll do it with lum, which is grounding. And then what I lead afterwards is as important as the actual practice itself. And I'll show you
absolutely.
So 3-part inhalation. Inhale forward, inhale to the side, inhale up, lum, 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 lum. I'll do 2 more. Lum, and those who are watching this can do it with me. Lum. And then allow the body to rise and allow the eyes to soften or close and sense the energy you have awakened in your left palm, the tingling perhaps in your left palm, the fingertips, the left arm, all the way up the side of your face, left side of your face, crown of the head. Sense the energy on the right side of your face, right arm, all the way down to the tingling, the pool of energy in the right palm, perhaps, the fingertips, the spaces between the fingers. This is your birthright. We're not awakening, we're not creating energy with these kinds of practices. We're awakening your own inner healing energy. Inhale from feet to crown, I am. Exhale to your feet, here, grounded, ready. And as you're ready, you can allow your eyes to flutter open. And so what I did after that vigorous practice was to, first of all, do a little mini body scan, which brings us home so that if we took our vital signs, our heart rate and blood pressure, while we're doing that practice, it would be slightly elevated. And then if we measured afterwards, it would be below the resting heart rate, for example, because we've done that mini body scan, which brings the energy down, and then we've grounded it with the breath. Inhale from feet to crown, I am. Exhale to feet, here. And when I used to lead the LifeForce Yoga practitioner training, which is now in my former assistant Rose Cress's hands, I would, there would be Ashtanga yogis in the training, and they would use that technique of sensing into the body, like the left side of the body, in between the sides. So if you start with the right side and do series A on the right side, they'd stop, they'd do a standing shavasana and sense the energy all along the right side. Inhale up through the right foot, to the crown of the head. Exhale down to the left foot, sensing. Let's move over into the left side. So you have, and do the practice that way, because that way you're actually giving a moment of just like being in the body, and the body is always present. The mind's a time traveler, but the moment we can totally become absorbed in the body, we are that presence. It's like a window through whatever mood is visiting. We are in that deeper place. And that's the gift that, as a teacher, we offer our students.
Oh, that's wonderful, Amy. Just to wrap it up, and you've got the yoga class and you're feeling nice and peaceful in the class, or energized or whatever. And I mean, give me any words of wisdom about bringing it out of the class to daily life when those feelings arise again, and and you're not in the class and your yoga pants and able to do postures. How do the two things affect the class and the yoga, and just trying to better oneself in daily life, or elevate one's moods, or etc. Get self. Yeah.
Well, I first of all, I think as you're practicing daily, you're building resilience.
Of course,
you're building the muscle of physically and emotionally. You're building that inner resource to be able to receive what life brings without reacting as much to it. But then again, there are very subtle practices that you can do. One practice might be, I was in Trader Joe's, which is a grocery store here.
Yeah, I know. I was in Canada for a while.
And the phone rang, and it was someone I had been working with, and she was in a panic. She couldn't even tell me what was going on.
Right.
So we had worked together. I said, just place your right hand on your heart. That in itself is calming. And I said, let's just, and here I am by the produce aisle saying, let's do that sound for the heart. And so it was, and just doing that sound was enough. And it could be hum, it could be it could be om. Those sounds, first of all, you're extending the exhalation, which is activating parasympathetic calming energy, and it's very soothing. It vibrates the heart. So there we were. We just stood, and I stood. She was sitting, and did yam. But there are also some breathing practices, like left nostril breathing, inhaling through the left, exhaling through the right. Or, doing a mudra, a calming mudra, like Adi mudra, thumbs into the palms and grounding it. And then just bringing the breath, say, up the left side, down the right side. You could be standing in a line or out on the street and witness something. Just take Adi mudra, and ground your energy. And breathe from your feet to your crown, I am. Exhale into your feet, here. Grounded, ready.
Yeah, so there's some connective practices from, say, big practice with a capital, and just practice integrating that through all life circumstances during the day, because usually it's not in the yoga practice itself that one's forced to deal with difficult situations. In the class, right? It's daily life. But anyway, I'm so grateful to have you here today, Amy, and have this chat with you. And for our listeners, you will see Amy's details below, and you can follow her to her website and see what she's doing. And I fully recommend you do so. Thank you, Amy, for joining on Keen Yoga Chats. And it's been a wonderful chat. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.